going to start. There it goes. All right, so this is one of those lessons. Every once in a while, we got one of these lessons that's kind of like a landmark lesson. To me, this is one of the major lessons that kind of stands out. It's not just an ordinary thing. A lot of lessons we do is just kind of, okay, we just learned a little bit more than we learned before, all that kind of stuff. I think completing the square was a semi-landmark lesson, but this one's huge, all right? Quadratic formula. This is something that you're going to use. It's very, very helpful, extremely helpful. And it makes things, most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of times, I'll say that. A lot of times it makes solving for x way easier than what it was before, okay? We've learned several different ways that you could solve for x. One way is graphing. We didn't really talk too much in here about solve by graphing, but I'll show you just very generally. I don't know if have we graphed parabolas in here?
No. Or yeah, that's a thing called curve.
Yeah, I think we have, haven't we? Yeah, we didn't get really into it, but like if that's a parabola, if I wanted to solve for x, like remember this is a parabola, so it's like I'm not even going to write down any numbers or anything, but it's like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, and of course these are numbers. A, b, and c would be numbers, right? And sometimes you can get a parabola that looks like this. There are times when you could solve for x. There's times when graphing doesn't help you, but there are times when graphing could help you. Where would the x actually be? It's where it crosses the x-axis. You see that? So if I wanted to solve for x, x would equal, in this situation, whatever this number is, negative, I don't know, let's just make up a number. Where do you think that is? -4, okay. And where do you think that is? 2, all right, +2. So that's one way to solve for x. Okay, you could graph it, all right, and then see where it crosses the x-axis. There are times, though, and we're not going to get into it today, but there are times where it doesn't cross the x-axis. Yep, I mean, sometimes you might have a graph that looks like this, or a graph that looks like this, and it doesn't cross the x-axis. So how in the world did you find x? Well, you can't. You can't find it, okay, if you have a graph that looks like that. You can't find it by graphing. We'll say it that way. Make sense? All right, it's not that big of a deal because we're not really going to do graphing. Another way, you could solve for x. What did they call it? They gave it a name. What was the name of that lesson? I forget it off the top of my head. Let me see. Let me go back a little bit before that. Oh, taking the roots. Remember that? Solve by taking roots. Okay, we had a whole thing so we could do it by that. Taking the roots. But not every quadratic can you solve by taking the roots. Then we learn how to complete the square. Oh, let's do another one. Instead of completing, we learned to solve by factoring. Remember that? All right, so we learned how to solve by factoring. Not everything can be factored really nice. Okay, so this will work sometimes. Well, let's say this right here will work sometimes. This will work sometimes. This will work sometimes. But we want something that's going to work how many times? All the time, every time, okay? So what is one method that we just finished learning? Completing the square. So that'll work all the time. But that can be a little bit cumbersome. Wouldn't you agree? Completing the square. Yeah, absolutely. It can be a little bit cumbersome. Sometimes it works out pretty nice and easy, but then sometimes, oh man, it's kind of a pain. But that'll work every time. Now, the last way that we're going to learn, is it the last way? I don't know. We'll say the next way. All right, the next way we're going to learn, and that'll work every single time, is the what? Is the quadratic formula. All right, so let's write that down. Quadratic. I can't write very well today. That's a C. Quadratic formula. All right, so this is what we're going to learn today. And it'll work every time. All right, every one of the problems we give, you should be able to solve for x using the quadratic formula. Why would we use the quadratic formula? Because it's a touch easier or less complicated maybe, less tedious, however you want to say it, than completing the square. Completing the square sometimes is okay, sometimes it's a pain. quadratic formula works out really nice, and it's usually a little bit easier, streamlined way. You do it the same way every single time, and it's a nice way to do it. All right, so what in the world is the quadratic formula? Well, let's do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a quadratic equation. What's a general quadratic equation? It's a what? X squared plus bx plus c, and it's an equation, so what's it equal to? Equal to 0. So that's a quadratic equation. What we're going to do right now, it's not something that I'm going to put on a homework or a test or a quiz or anything like that, but I think it's very important for you to see how we get the quadratic equation. You hear what I said? So I want to come up with the quadratic equation from this. So really what I'm going to do, I'm going to solve for x, okay? Using this equation right there. And I'm going to do it by completing the square, right? Since I don't know what the quadratic equation is right now, what's the only other way that I could solve for this? Completing the square. I can't really factor it because there's letters in here that represent numbers. I don't know what they are, but I could complete the square. So that's what we're going to do, okay? Now, don't get all upset when we're halfway through this. You're like, oh my goodness, Mr. Hammock, you lost me a mile away, all right? Because that's what you're probably going to think. But I think this is a good exercise for us. I really do. I could just come out and say, here's the quadratic formula. Here's how you use it. Bing, bang, boom. We got answers, okay? But I think it's important to see where it comes from. And that's what we're going to do. So this is one of my favorite things to show students. I think it's kind of cool. So I'm going to start with this. Whoops. Ax squared plus bx. I'm just rewriting that. Plus c. And we're going to set it equal to 0. And we're going to solve for x. Now, let's do it by completing the square. You're like, Mr. Herrick, what are we going to do? We got no numbers. I got that squared. I like the little 2 right there. That's the only thing I have. Well, remember, a, b, and c represent what? Numbers, okay? So let's work with this just like we would work with numbers, okay? And but they're letters. They're variables, okay? So what's the first thing we would do here? If I was going to complete the square, I got a number out in front of that x squared, don't I? There's a huge hint. So what do I do? Okay, divide both sides by, or everything by a, right? Divide this by a, divide that by a, divide that by a, and technically we're dividing this by a as well, but what's going to happen to that? It's just going to stay 0, okay? Everybody with me so far? Remember completing the square, right? Okay, so what happens? Let's rewrite it. What's this going to be? X squared plus, let's write this so this is a coefficient, all right? So I'm going to write what? B over a, and then I'm going to put an x next to it. Now, what did I always do with this? I always did what? Moved it to the right side. Good. So let's move it now. I'm going to leave a blank there, though. I'm not going to put any equals right here. Okay? I need to leave a space because I'm going to complete the square, right? So I'm going to leave a little space. I'll put the equals over here. This is a 0, so if I move this over here, what does it become? Negative c over a. All right, so what have we done so far? The only thing we've done like 1.5 steps, right? We divided everything by a, and then I took this. That's kind of like my half step. Then I just took that and I moved it to the other side. Everybody good? Pretty easy so far, right? Just completing the square. Now, what did I do to complete the square? To fill out what, remember, it's always going to be plus. Okay, half of what? No, I don't square anything yet. I take half of something. You're right. Half of what? Half b over a. Good. So I'm going to go half of b over a. And then, once I take half of it, then I can do what? Square it. Okay, so let's do that. So what is half of b over a? Good, b over 2a. But I have to do what to it? Square it. What happens here when we square it? Is it? B squared over 4a squared. Because I got to square the 2, right? 2 squared is 4. So don't just leave it at 2. So it's 4a squared. You with me? Took half of it and I squared it. Not hard, pretty basic. Now what do I do with that? Well, I add it to both sides, right? I put it right here. What I did, By doing this thing, by taking half of it and squaring it, I made this left side into a perfect square. Looks a little uglier than what we've done before because usually the numbers kind of cancel out and all that kind of thing. All right. Oops. Let me just move this out of the way. Now, if I added it to the left side, add it to the right side. So I'm going to go b squared over 4a squared. All right? You're like, man, this looks uglier than what I started with. All right? And you're right, but we're on the right track. What did I do to the left side? By taking half of this and squaring it and putting it here, I've made this into a perfect square, right? So what's going to go here? What times what is x squared? X. What's my sign? Where do I always look? I always look to the first one, right? That one right there. I mean, they're all positive, so there's not much of a choice. But I'm going to put a plus. Now, what goes here? Good. B over 2a. How did you get b over 2a? Well, you could have got it one of two ways. You could have just taken half of the middle one, and that would be 1 over, or b over 2a, wouldn't it? Or you could look at this one and take the square root of it. What's the square root of this? Well, it's b. What's the square root of that? 2. What's the square root of that? A. Either way, you could have done it. Everybody with me? All right, so we made that. Now, that looks a lot better than what it did before. What's this going to be? I'm not going to write anything down right here just yet. I got a fraction. I got two fractions that are being added together. So what do I always need when I add fractions together? Common denominator. What would your common denominator be here? 4a squared. 4a squared. We good? Now, what did you do to this a to get 4a squared? That's it. You multiply that by 4a, and what do you do to the top? And then what's that going to give us? Minus what? Let's put it in alphabetical order, make it look pretty. What's that going to be? 4ac. What about this one? Well, we didn't have to do anything, did we? Well, technically, we multiply by 1, right? So we multiply that by 1, you get plus b squared. So all I did right here, this little step right here, I'm just adding those two fractions together. That's all I did. Just addition. Now I'm going to make it look a little bit nicer. I like that. Where would you rather have that b squared? Probably out in front, right? Before the minus 4ac. You don't have to. It just looks a lot nicer, so let's do it that way. So I'm going to get b squared minus what? 4ac over what? 4a squared. Good. So all in all, every step hasn't been that hard, has it? Now, there's been quite a few steps, and you got to remember what to do. That's the part that's hard. But really, the math hasn't been that difficult at all. You just got to know what to do and when to do it. Everybody good so far? What do we do now? Take the square root. That's right. So if I take the square root of the left side, what's going to happen to that squared? It's going to cancel, right? What do I have to do over here? Take the square root over here. What do I always put in front of it, though? Plus or minus, right? These are the exact same steps that we did when we completed the square earlier with just regular numbers. Agreed? So what do we have? I got x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus. Now let's do this. Let's split the square root, okay? Because we're taking square to the top, square to the bottom. Agreed? So let's do this. Square root of what? B squared minus 4ac over what? The square root of 4a squared. What is that? Just 2a. That's right. We're almost done. We got one kind of regular step, and then the rest is just kind of simplifying it a little bit. All right? What do I do with this b over 2a? Subtract it. So, look, I'm ready to actually put x by itself. That's what we're trying to do in the first place, isn't it? Try to get x by itself. Solve for x, right? So I got to subtract b over 2a. So I'm going to put it in front. Correct? Plus or minus, square root. Now, can I take the square root of the stuff in here? Can I take the square root of b squared and then the square root of 4? Why not? Well, it's because, excuse me, because you got a minus in between, okay? If they were all being multiplied, sure, you could do that. But since you got a minus, you cannot take the square root of those individually. All right, so you got to keep it the way it looks. So you got to go b squared minus 4ac over what? 2a. Now, we're ready to write the answer the way that everybody knows the quadratic formula. What basically do I have to do here just to clean it up a little bit? Put it all over 2a. That's right. Okay, you already got a common denominator here, correct? So here it is. This is the first time, well, at least in here, this is the first time that I think, did we do quadratic formula at all? Did I even mention it? Okay, I don't think so. I mentioned it, but I never showed it to you, I don't think. Here it is. This, what I'm going to write down now, is something that you need to have memorized for the rest of your math career, okay? As long as you keep teaching math, or keep learning math, this is something that's super important that teachers are going to expect you to know, okay? They expect you to know the quadratic formula. So here it is. It's negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac. All of that whole entire thing is over what? 2a. There it is. That is the quadratic formula. We need like little fireworks coming out of it or something, or music playing or something like that. All right, because it's that important. All right, that is the what? What do we call this thing? The quadratic formula. All right. Now look, all that stuff that we just did, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look at all that mess. That looks like we're pretty smart, doesn't it? All right, but you understood every step, didn't you? We went step by step. You knew how to do completing the square. It's the same thing. It's a little bit more difficult just because you don't have numbers in there, right, to add together, cancel out, and all that kind of stuff. All right, but it all ends up to be this right there. So that means that we can use this to solve for x. All right, so let's do an example. That's what we all want anyway, isn't it? So let's do example 1. Now, this is something, example 1, if you wanted to, you could solve this by factoring, all right? And it would actually be a little easier, all right? But you can't always factor stuff, okay? So you got to have something that you can use every single time. Remember the beginning of the lesson? There are some things you just can't factor, all right? So there's just no way to do it by factoring. Now, this one you could factor it. In fact, let's look at it and do it by factoring, and then let's use the quadratic formula, okay? So it says to solve, and this is what we're going to do. X squared plus 4 equals 5x. Now, this doesn't exactly look like a quadratic, does it? I mean, it kind of does because we've got a squared, you got an x, you got a number. But what order do we want this in? We want x squared. Okay, what's the bx? Minus 5x. Very good, because we're going to have to put this on the left-hand side, right? Because I want it on the same side with the x squared. So I subtract a 5x. Actually, let's do it right here, not up there. So I subtract a 5x. Now, this 4 is already on the left-hand side, so let's just keep it there. Now, if I subtract that 5x, what do I have over here? I got a 0. So when you have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, when you have that situation, you can use the quadratic formula to solve for x, okay? Let's do it by factoring first, just to show you that in this case, it is easier to factor than it is to solve. But I want to do it by factoring, see our answer. Then I want to do it with the quadratic formula because I want to see that you can get the same exact answer. And you should, if you do it right. So by factoring, what do we put? X and x, right? This is pretty easy factoring. What times what is positive and the same two numbers added together are negative? Well, they both have to be negative, correct? I always like to put the signs there first. Now, what am I going to put here and here in order for them to multiply to be 4 and add up to be negative 5? 4 and 1, right? Can't use 2 and 2 because 2 and 2 would add up to be a negative 4, all right? But 4 and 1 will work. And they're both the same sign, so it doesn't matter which one is the 4, which one is the 1. Agreed? Yes? All right. So now, remember we said when two things are being multiplied together and your answer is 0, I can set either one of these equal to 0, or both of them, I should say. Right? Solve for x. What's x equal to? 4. What's x equal to here? It's 1. So that would be the answer to this problem. But I didn't do quadratic formula, did I? Okay, I just showed you this way because it was kind of easy. There are times when you can use factoring and it comes out pretty easy. But it's not always going to be like that. Let's take this and just move it over here out of the way. Now, that was one way to solve it. I just want to see our answers. Now, if I wanted to, I could do it by completing the square, but I got too much to do to worry about that. All right, I already did it one way. Now, I'm going to concentrate on using the quadratic formula. So, what I would do if I were you, okay, it's the first time, today's the first time you've seen the quadratic formula. You probably don't have it memorized just yet, do you? So, what should you do on every single problem? Write it out. I would write it out, every problem. Don't just put it at the top and refer to it. Don't just have your book open and refer to it. I would write it out every single time. Okay? Now, do you have to do that on a quiz or a test? No. Why am I asking you to do that on your homework? So that you do what? So you remember it. So you memorize it, okay? Because this has to be memorized. I will not give you the quadratic formula on a quiz or a test, right? You have to have it memorized. So let's write it down. X equals what? Negative b. You got it in your notes, right? Plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac. All that is over 2a. All right? You have to have that memorized. Got it? Good. Let's come over here. I got A, B's, and C's, don't I? Or A, B's, and C. Or 2 A's, a couple B's, 1 C. So what's my A in this situation? It's 1, because it's the coefficient to the x squared. What's the B? So that's the A. The B is negative 5. What's the C? Positive 4. Now, you don't have to do what I'm going to do, but I think it's helpful, especially when you're first learning quadratic formula. I think what I'm going to do right now is very, very helpful. You don't have to. It takes a couple more seconds. That's about all it takes. But watch. I like to list the A, B, and C. Sometimes that can be very helpful. So what is the A again? 1. What is the B? It's negative 5. Make sure you take that sign right there, okay? So it's a negative 5. What's the C? Positive 4. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug and chug, right? X equals. Now, what does this mean? Negative b. It means the opposite of what b is. Well, b is negative 5, so what's negative b? Positive 5. Negative 5, right? So that's a positive 5. Plus or minus square root b squared. We can do that in our head. What's negative 5 squared? 25. It's not negative 25 because you're squaring the negative, correct? So that's going to be a 25. Minus 4 times a. What's the a? 1. What's the c? 4, okay? We'll work on that in a second. Over 2 times a, which is just 2 times 1. So that's plugging stuff in, okay? It's substituting, whatever you want to call it. Math teachers like to say plug it in, all right? That's what we just did. Now, basically, all you got to do is just simplify this thing right here, all right? And then you should be good. So what do I write first? 5 plus or minus square root. Let's do this. This is 25. This is minus what? 16. I'm going to show probably more steps than I would do myself, just to kind of show you since it's the first time. Over what? Just 2. Let's keep going. 5 plus or minus square root. What's 25 minus 16? That would be 9 over 2. Well, square root of 9, that works out nice and pretty. So let's keep putting equal signs here. So what do I got? 5 plus or minus what? 3, and that's over 2. Whoops, if I get right. 2. Now what I'm going to do is this. The plus or minus. Now I'm at a point where I can actually do the plus, and then I can do the minus. All right, so here's what I'm going to write. X equals 5 plus 3 over 2, correct? And then what am I going to write over here? X is equal to 5 minus 3 over 2. We can do this in our head, can't we? 5 plus 3 is 8, divided by 2 is 4. Does that look familiar? Absolutely, right there, doesn't it? All right, and what's this? 5 minus 3 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Does that look familiar? Absolutely, right there. So what's my answers? X equals 4. I'm going to put comma 1. You could write it like this if you wanted to. X equals 4, X equals 1. It's just a little more succinct, a little more streamlined, a little easier, less writing, and then that would be your answer. The reason I did this by factoring at first is just to show you that you can get the same exact answer. Which one was a better way to solve this particular problem? The factoring, absolutely. But what did I say? Not everything can be factored. Okay? Let's do another one. Now that was nice and easy because you came out to nice whole numbers. Okay, nice integer numbers. Okay, that was nice. You're not always going to come out to nice integer numbers, believe me. They're going to come out looking pretty weird. So let's do another one. I only got 2 more examples. This one and then the next one. So I'm going to skip example 4. There is an example 4 in the book. I'm skipping it. We'll just stop at example 3. So here's what it says. It says to solve. Now they want you to do these all by quadratic formula. Okay, so if you can see that it factors, don't do it by factoring. Okay, if you really love completing the square, don't do it by completing the square. Why? Because what are we practicing in this lesson? The quadratic formula. So do every one of these with the quadratic formula, okay? Just so that you can practice. So here it is. 4x squared plus 12x equals 11. What's the first thing I'm going to do before I even think about doing the quadratic formula? Well, yeah, I could do that. Bring this to the other side. Very good. Put it in the quadratic equation, right? Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I want to make sure I have this equal to 0. So, like Zanaya said, I'm going to take this 11, bring it to the other side. So 4x squared plus 12x, what's this going to be now? Minus 11 equals 0. Now, if you wanted to, okay, I like to list over off to the side my a, b, and c. That's helpful for some people. For some, they don't really need it. They can just look at that and say, oh, I know that's the A. All right, that's the B, that's the C. That's fine. No big deal. Okay, but I think for beginners, I think it's good to list them. So what is the A? 4. What's the B? 12. What's the C? Negative 11. Very good. Okay, so now, what did I say to do? Write it every single time. So I'm going to do that since I told you to do it. I mean, I already got this thing memorized, but you do this a handful of times and you'll have this thing memorized. All right, so there it is. So let's solve for x. Negative b. So what do we write? This time it is negative 12, right? Because it was positive, now it's negative. Plus or minus square root. B squared. We can do that in our head. What's 12 squared? 144. Yeah, that's your last multiplication table, isn't it? Minus 4 times A times C. Thank you. Just put it down anywhere. Okay, what's the A? It's 4. What's the C? Negative 11. Okay, over 2 times A. 2 times 4. So now all we're doing is just simplifying this stuff inside the square root. All right, sometimes they're easier, sometimes they're harder. All right, this is kind of in between. So I got negative 12 plus or minus, big old square root. Now let's figure out what we got here. I'm going to get my notes so I know what these numbers are. So first of all, let's do the sign. Well, let's do this, 144. Anywhere right there. So I got negative and negative. They're being multiplied, so what's this going to be? Plus, and then 4 times 4 is 16. Oh, 16 times 11. Here's a good chance. Watch. Do you know how to multiply a 2-digit number by 11? Watch this. Here's a little trick. You know it, Lily? Yep. Separate the 1 and the 6, then add them together and put it in the middle. That's how you multiply by 11. Isn't that cool? Or a 2-digit number. Anybody seen that before? If you didn't know that, it's fine. Use a calculator. Whatever. You could do that too. Yep. 160 plus a 16. But this is kind of fun, isn't it? You split them up, you add them, stick them in the middle, whatever. 176 over what? 8. Let's go to the right. Negative 12 plus or minus square root. What's that big old number? 320 over 8. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated because you got to know how to simplify your square roots. Do you know how to simplify something like that? It doesn't come out to a nice even number, but you can simplify it though. Here's what I would do. You could do this a couple different ways. What do you see right off the bat? What times what's 320? 32 times 10. That's what I would go. Okay, so I would go 32 times 10, wouldn't you? This is kind of off to the side. Let's break this. Now, I can't take the square root of 32. I can't take the square root of 10. But I can break down 32. What's that? That's what I would use. I mean, you could use 8 times 4, right? But I would go, what? 16 times 2. Now, watch this. I got a 2 here. What did I say 10 was? 2 times 5, right? So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it times 2 times 5. We haven't really had a lesson on this stuff, all right? They kind of expect you to know this from Algebra 1. We are eventually going to have a lesson on this stuff. We're going to do a lot of these kind of things. But let's keep going. I could break these down. Square root of 16. What's 2 times 2? So this is the square root of 4, and this is square root of 5. What's the square root of 16? 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. And then the square root of 5, I just leave it like that. So what does it come down to? 8 square root of 5. So this 320, this square root of 320, boils down to what? 8 times the square root of 5. So let's write it like that. So it's negative 12 plus or minus what? 8 square root of 5. And that's all over what? 8. We good? So let's write it like this. Negative 12 divided by 8 and 8 square root of 5 divided by 8. A lot of people think this. Oh, the 8 and the 8 cancel, and that 8 doesn't exist anymore. That's not really true, because this 8 is also being divided by the 12, okay, the negative 12, okay? So just to save us a little bit of problems, I'm going to split it up. I'm going to go negative 12 over 8, then I'm going to put the plus or minus, and then I'm going to go what? 8 square root of 5 over 8. Isn't that the same thing as this? Okay, but a lot of people get confused. They start thinking, oh, 4 goes into that, 4 goes into that, and they think that just can't go into this anymore. But it goes into both of them, right? Divides into both of them because it's common denominator, all that stuff. All right, we're almost done. Negative 12 over 8. Okay, so 4 goes into this, what? Twice. 4 goes into this 3 times. So I got negative 3 over 2 plus or minus. What happens here? The 8's cancel out, don't they? So what am I left with? Just the square root of 5. And that is how you would write your answer. Just like that. Once you get used to this, it'll go a lot faster. You got to practice. And I'm going to give you time to practice. In fact, I split it up into 2 days, right? I'm giving you today and I'm giving you tomorrow. I'm giving you new problems tomorrow. So I'm giving you time to practice. It takes some practice. Doing the quadratic formula itself is kind of easy. Just plug and chug. No big deal. Just got to memorize what the formula is. But then simplifying stuff, especially when you have a square root, sometimes causes people some trouble. All right? But the more you do it, the more you see me do it, the easier it's going to be. Ready to do another one? What do you think? You think you like the quadratic formula better than completing the square? I mean, you could have done this. What would you have to do, though? Keep the 11 over here. Take half of that, which is 6. Square it, which is 36. So you add it here. You find a perfect square, right? You could do that. And some of you might like that better. But I'm telling you, in the long run, using the quadratic formula is probably the better way to do it. Okay? You just got to get used to simplifying stuff. Let's do one more and we'll quit. Example 3. You guys taking good notes, writing all this down? All right. What I would do is not just rely on just watching me do this. Even if you are taking notes and writing it down, don't just rely on that. What you should do, maybe even, now look, this will take you longer, but if you want to really learn it, what you should do is before you even do those problems, take one of these, okay? You don't have to do all 3 of them, but take the second one or the third one, right? And then just write down the problem, put all your notes away, okay? Don't have your YouTube out, just try it yourself, right? When you get stuck, then you go back on your notes and see what you did wrong. Once you can do one of those completely by yourself, then go ahead and try the homework problems. All right, that's a good way to do it. Whether you do it or not, it's another story, but I'm just giving you helpful hints. All right, look at this. They set this up nice and perfect for you, don't they? You don't have to rearrange anything. Everything's good to go. So I'm going to list my A, B, and C. A is 1, B is -10, C is 29. Now I got to put this into the quadratic formula. You don't have to do this on a quiz or a test, but on a homework, I would do this every single time so that you memorize it. You might think you have it memorized, but then you stay away from it for a day or so, and you forget it. But the more and more you write it, it's going to help you out. I'll write it over here off to the side. X equals what? Can you do it without looking at your paper? What is it? -b, not square root yet, plus or minus. Now you do a square root. What's inside of there? B squared minus 4ac. And the whole thing, not just the square root. That's what a lot of people make a mistake too. This whole thing is over what? 2a. Write it down every single time so you memorize it, okay? So let's do it. X equals -b. Well, b is -10, so what's -b? Which is +10. Plus or minus, square root. Again, I'm looking over here. B squared, we can do that in our head. What's that squared? -10 squared. It's 100, good. Is it -100? No, because we're squaring the negative, right? Negative times negative is positive. Minus 4 times a, which is a 1. Do I really need to put the 1 there? No. Let's do the c. What's that? 29. That whole thing is over 2 times 1, which is just 2. We good? We're not done. It'd be nice if we were, but you got to simplify this stuff. So let's do it. 10 plus or minus square root. What's this? 4 times 29. Do you know what 2 times 29 is off the top of your head? 58. Then double 58 gives you what? 116. So let's do this. 100 minus 116 over 2. Let's come over this way. 10 plus or minus square root. What do we have here? What's 100 minus 116? Negative what? 16. What did we introduce on this one we haven't done yet? An I, right? Because that negative inside the square root is going to become an I, isn't it? All right? That's not that hard. All right? We got that stuff down now, don't we? That I stuff over 2. Keep going. 10 plus or minus. Can we do this in our head? You know that negative becomes a what? An I, right? What's the square root of 16? So it's just a 4i. See how easy that is? Over what? Over 2. But again, we got to do what to it? Divide both of these by 2. Can you do that in your head? I think you can. 10 divided by 2 is 5 plus or minus. 4 divided by 2 is 2 what? That's your answer. I'm kind of liking this quadratic formula, aren't you? No? Why wouldn't you like it? I mean, this one actually simplified easier than the other one did because you didn't have that big old square root. This one you just came out with 16. So sometimes they work out a lot easier than others, okay? Sometimes they get really kind of tricky. To tell you the truth, though, I don't think it really gets much more difficult than what you did right here. Okay, I think example 2 is probably the hardest one out of all of these. But there you go. That's not that much. All right, it's just this right there. That's all there is to it. So that should only take you, how long do you think that would take you if you just did it and you knew what you were doing and you just write it down? 5? I bet you it'd take you less than that. I bet you it'd take you 2 to 3 minutes. Once you get used to it, once you get comfortable, I understand at first it's going to probably take you 5 minutes because you got to think about it. But once you get into the groove of this and you just see what comes next, right? So basically just as fast as you could write. That's what I loved about algebra. I was always terrible at math. But then I got into algebra, and I remember one time specifically, I was at study hall. It was at George Reed. I was in a study hall, and it was in the lunchroom. All these people, it was all loud. I blocked everything else out because it was just Algebra 1. It was super easy stuff. But I just remember not even having to think about what the next step was. I just saw it, you know? And again, it was like easy solve for x stuff. 3x plus 2 equals 7, right? Subtract 2, divide by 3. I just remember, for some reason, thinking, I can't even write fast enough to keep up with my brain. It was always the other way around. It was always, my brain is not getting this, right? I'm ready to write, but I just can't think of what to do next. When I got to algebra, it was completely different. And I just remember that. I was like, just as fast as I could write, I could do these. And I just felt like, man, I'm actually learning something. This is so cool. And that's what kind of got me into liking math. It's not because I was really good at it, but it was so much better than like long multiplication and long division. Didn't you hate that stuff? Okay, like, I don't know, 367 times 431. But I hated doing that. I hated it. I don't know why. It was just irritating to me. Or something like this. 237 times 751028. Okay, yeah, division problem. Did you like that? No way you can tell me you love doing these problems. Are you serious? I hated this stuff. I would much rather do 100 of these than I would 100 of these. Okay? I don't know, man. And it depends on what you like, and plus I've done these. This is the first day you've seen this, okay? So, and I've done this for 40 years, all right, at least, and probably more than that. So there's definitely a difference there. But to me right now, I enjoy doing this much, much more than I like doing that. I hated doing this stuff. That was my downfall. But thank goodness we have calculators. You can just throw it into a calculator and get an answer. All right, enough of that. So we're doing 1 to 15. 1 to 15. It's 5-7A. 5-7A. All right. It's page 215 if you need the page number. All right. Get that done. At first, it's going to take you a little bit of time. But the more and more you do, you're going to go faster and faster and faster at it. And as fast as you could write. I'm telling you. When you get to that point, tell me. All right. Because I want to know. As fast as you could write, I bet you could do these.